Week 10 is here, and the running back landscape is solid, but shifts occur week to week. Some stars are steady, others are boom or bust, and a few new names are forcing their way into your starting lineup. So let's break down who you can actually trust heading into Week 10. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King. And before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings from the Headliners team. And for more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos from Kyle already posted this week. And if you want even more breakdowns each week, make sure to join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and an exclusive spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we dive into this week's rankings, we have a few hits and misses from Week 9. We'll start out with our first hit, and that's Kyron Williams. We threw him into the top 10 last week and got scared early because they started throwing on the goal line again, but he got his touchdown later, and he finished in the top 10. Our next hit was Kareem Hunt, and with Pacheco out in a tough Buffalo matchup, we still put Hunt at RB16, and he finished right on the nose at RB16. Next up is Ashton Genty, and a lot of people didn't like that we kept Genty in Tier 2, but the guy is a Tier 2 running back the majority of weeks, and he actually even outperformed that with how high that we had him. Our next miss was Rico Dowdle, and we thought that keeping him inside the top 24 was a good thing. I guess we should have had him top 5 because he's absolutely unstoppable right now. Next up is Tyrone Tracy, and splitting with Devin Dingleberry is not ideal. We expected more of a reliance on Tracy, but this could be a really gross split. And next up is Kamani Vidal. And okay, Devin, take me out of the tiny box, put me on the big screen, cut the music. Headliner Nation, I need you to step inside of my office because we need to have a little therapy chat. In the words of Jerry Maguire, help me help you. Help me help you. Last week, we put Kamani Vidal at 13, not because anybody asked us to, not because of the pressure in the comments, but because the analysis of the Headliner team is second to none. It's why you're watching this video. The matchup was great. We put the man at 13, fringe RB1 territory, locked RB2 territory. Why? Because he was playing the third worst defense in the NFL, and the man finishes at RB44. He should have gone off. And before you go off in the comments saying, hey, what's with all the Vidal hate, yada, yada, let me ask Vidal owners, like, really, how are you feeling about this? Right? How does that make you feel? And the reason I'm keying in on this is because I own Vidal in almost all leagues, and I play this game just like you, and I'm frustrated, just like I'm frustrated with Caleb Williams, just like I'm frustrated with Roman Dunze. It's what makes this channel great, because we actually play the game and are as invested as you are. And you can look up rankings anywhere, but you're here because more often than not, we get it right. And we're real, entertaining people who own it when we don't. So yes, I have thoughts and feelings, especially when the stats don't make sense. And if there's anything that I learned in therapy, it's this. When somebody tells you who they really are, believe them. Believe them. And Vidal has told us that he's a boom or bust player. He just is. Believe him until he shows you otherwise, and please keep your peace. I love you, Headliner Nation. Serenity now.
Serenity now! Serenity now!
All right, enough of the therapy session. Let's move over to Tier 1. For Week 10, we have Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, James Cook, Jahmyr Gibbs, Josh Jacobs, Devon Achane, and Rico Dowdle. Topping the list, as always, we have Jonathan Taylor. And in a year that we're having with fantasy football, someone please tell Jonathan Taylor that he is not allowed to have bad games. Let's hope that last week was just a fluke, and now he gets the Falcons, who are easier to run on than they are to throw on. At number 2, we have Christian McCaffrey, and when these two teams faced off a little over a month ago, McCaffrey had 30 touches for almost 140 total yards and a touchdown. He's had over 100 total yards in all but one game this year, and he's obviously staying inside of the top 3. At number 3, we have Bijan Robinson, and Bijan was able to bounce back in Week 9, has now scored at least 13 fantasy points in all but one game this year. Now this week, he gets a matchup against Indy, who allows the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs, so our fingers are crossed. At number 4, we have James Cook, and he started up another 100-yard per game streak. He's had at least 100 total yards in 6 of his 8 games this season. And this is a great matchup for him going against Miami, who allows over 23 fantasy points per game to the running back position. At number 5, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, and gosh, what a crappy week 9 that he had, right? A season low in touches, total yards. The only thing that could cure this is a great matchup, which is exactly what they have this week against a struggling Commanders team. At number 6, we have Josh Jacobs, and Jacobs has scored at least 10 fantasy points in all but one game this year, and the one game in which he didn't, he scored 9.9. Green Bay will want to run the ball to keep it away from Philly this week, who allows over 21 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 7, we have Devon Achane, and Achane is the only running back on the season to have scored at least 10 fantasy points in all 9 games this year. He's the mark of consistency, and it's always a tough matchup against Buffalo, so you have to expect that he'll be heavily involved in the passing game again this week. At number 8, we've got Rico Dowdle, and Rico is currently 3rd in the NFL in rushing and only trails JT and James Cook. That's ridiculous considering that he's only been a starter for 5 weeks, and now he gets a matchup going against the Saints team that's tanking. First, and Rico is in full swing. All right, that's it for tier 1. Now, before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all hooked up on Underdog. You already know that we're crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year, so what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app. Create a new account using the referral code HEADLINERS when you do so. Then just make an initial deposit and come join a contest. And if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's HEADLINERS, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. Check this out. When you play your first $5, they're going to give you $100 in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget that Jake is going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in our show on Fridays. So links to join are in the description below, and we look forward to playing with you on Underdog this week. All right, let's move it on to tier 2. We have Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, Quinshon Judkins, Ashton Jeanty, Jaylen Warren, Kyle Monangai, and J.K. Dobbins. At number 9, we've got Derrick Henry going to Minnesota, and Henry got over 120 yards for the second time in his last 3 games last week. Lamar looks great, and he's throwing the ball downfield with ease, which only helps Henry, who now has a matchup against Minnesota, who limited the Detroit offense last week. At number 10, we have Saquon Barkley, and we saw Saquon tweak his groin prior to the bye week, and all signs are pointing to him being 100%, but there's always that risk with soft tissue injuries. Plus, Green Bay allows the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs on the season. At number 11, we have Kyron Williams, and it's hard to watch the Rams throw touchdowns when they're on the 1-yard line. We're used to those being Kyron touchdowns. Luckily, they get so many opportunities that he continues to produce. Plus, he crushed San Fran in their last meeting a few weeks ago, so we like Kyron here at number 11. At 12, we have Quinshon Judkins, and prior to the bye week, we saw him suffer a shoulder injury. He's currently questionable to play, but this is a great matchup against the Jets, who allowed the 8th most fantasy points per game to running backs and who just dealt away 2 of their best defenders. At 13, we have Ashton Jeanty, and the Raiders just dealt away Jacoby Myers, which means this offense will be a lot of Bowers and Jeanty. We love the pass catching upside as of late, but this will be a tough matchup against Denver, who allows the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. At number 14, we've got Jaylen Warren, and this every other week production thing is getting old with Jaylen Warren. Over his last 4 games, he's had 2 games with at least 15 points and 2 games with less than 9 points. He needs more consistent passing work to keep his floor safer. At 15, we've got Kyle Monangai, and so much of this has to do with the availability of DeAndre Swift. As of right now, Swift is questionable to play, and with how Monangai is playing, I don't see how Chicago rushes him back. Plus, the Giants allow the 2nd most fantasy points per game to running backs. At 16, we have J.K. Dobbins, and the touchdowns have stopped for Dobbins as of late, and it's killing his fantasy production. He's now had single-digit fantasy performances in 3 of his last 4 games. Now he gets a matchup against Vegas, who's actually easier to throw on than they are to run on. Okay, so that's tier 2. Now let's move it on to tier 3. We've got Breece Hall, Kamani Vidal, Bucky Irvin, Travis Etienne Jr., David Montgomery, and Alvin Kamara. At 17, we have Breece Hall, and Breece is still a Jet, shockingly. Now he gets to play on a team that will end up losing most of its games and prevent him from getting huge rushing volume. Not to mention this week's matchup against Cleveland is one of the toughest in the NFL. At 18, Kamani Vidal, and listen, we already talked about it, right? On again, off again, boom, bust. He produces in difficult matchups, disappears in easy ones, and it just makes it really hard to trust him. Now, Pittsburgh is easier to throw on than run on, and so we had to drop him down in the rankings this week. At number 19, we have Bucky Irving, and is this the week that Bucky returns? This was the week that was slated for him to come back from injury, but as of Wednesday, he still isn't practicing. If he's a full go, he moves to the top 12. If he sits, insert Rachaad White at this spot. At number 20, we have Travis Etienne Jr., and with so many injuries on the Jags offense, Etienne will have to be relied upon heavily. The problem with that is that the Jags have minimal weapons to throw the football to, and Houston is one of the tougher teams to run on in the NFL. At number 21, we have David Montgomery, and it's hard to believe that only one time this entire season has Montgomery had more than 15 touches in a game. He's highly touchdown dependent, and the touchdowns aren't there as frequently anymore. But this isn't a bad matchup against Washington. At number 22, we have Alvin Kamara, and the Saints shipped out Shaheed, so an offense that was already starved for playmakers is now even more reliant on Kamara. You also can't trust this Saints team to do anything that it's supposed to, but we do know that it's easier to run on Carolina. All right, that's it for Tier 3. Let's turn the page to Tier 4. We've got Travion Henderson, Tyrone Tracy, RJ Harvey, Kenneth Walker III, Zach Charbonnet, Nick Chubb, DeAndre Swift, and Aaron Jones. At 23, we have Travion Henderson, and listen, New England hates Henderson. Stevenson gets ruled out, and he still splits the backfield with a guy that most people have never heard of, Terrell Jennings. And so Stevenson, he's questionable to play again, and Henderson remains a weekly prayer at best. At number 24, we have Tyrone Tracy, and we're not giving up on Tracy early. Last week, they were trailing San Fran, and they never could really run the ball much. This matchup this week against Chicago is much better, so we should have a better understanding of his outlook after this week. At number 25, we have RJ Harvey. And the reason J.K. Dobbins hasn't been scoring touchdowns as of late is because of Harvey. Harvey has 5 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks, but he's doing it with minimal touches. He hasn't had a game with more than 8 touches since week 4. At number 26, we have Kenneth Walker III. And what's crazy about Walker scoring single digits in 4 straight games is the fact that he's still the RB25 overall in the season. The Arizona defense has played well as of late, so we're gonna need a touchdown here, but who knows who gets it, which leads us to the other side of that backfield, which at 27 is Zach Charbonnet, and he's getting slightly less overall volume, but we do know that he's getting the goal line work. No touchdown, no bueno for Charbonnet though. At number 28, we have Nick Chubb, and another nightmare of a backfield split here between Chubb and Marks, and it's been easier to throw on Jacksonville than run on him, but with bye weeks and injuries, we're at the bottom of the barrel here for running backs, and so that's why we have Nick Chubb right here at 28. At 29, we have DeAndre Swift, and he's currently questionable to play, but if he's a full go by the weekend, he'll become a Verge top 12 option in the rankings. If he's ruled out, then Monangai becomes the Verge top 12 option. And then rounding out the top 30, we have Aaron Jones, and he's currently questionable to play as well, and there's a tough matchup against Baltimore, but if he's a full go, he'll be a Verge top 24 play, and if he's ruled out, Mason will be right here around RB24 in the rankings. All right, so there you have it for tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the running back position for week 10. And we got a couple of guys on the outside looking in with Corey Krosky-Merritt, Jordan Mason, Rachaad White, Isaiah Davis, Bam Knight, Blake Corum, and Woody Marks. And that's how the running back rankings stack up for week 10. And we got to know, who are you rolling with this week? Is it the proven stud or the hot hands? Drop your running back decisions in the comments. Hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for new rankings and breakdowns every single week. Headliner Nation, we'll catch you in the next video.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.